a kind of definitive answer to say, well, I just don't like it. If they say, well, what do you think of this or that? What do you think of wine? Well, I don't like it. I just don't like it.
Well, quite the contrary. Duty is something in a way that you don't like.
You don't like.
Yeah.
Right.
It's an obligation. You have to do it. And Virgil would say, well, maybe you don't like me, but it's your duty to read my poem. And that's why he wrote it. He wrote it out of a sense of duty, and he wrote it for readers who would read it out of a sense of duty, and indeed it became one of the deadliest things in history. Along with Caesar's Gallic Wars, the Aeneid is the school book of Western civilization. Now, this has been true right up until right up to World War I. I guess it went out with the onslaught of what we call modern education, with John Dewey and all that. But right on up until the 1920s, there were two textbooks that every single schoolboy had to read, and by golly, it was a duty. He broke his jaw chewing on Latin paradigms in order to read Caesar and Virgil. These were the two great school books. It was a duty. The minute you say that, images of reluctant children going off to school come to mind. But, well...
See, now
you want to please the children.
We say we want to have schools where children will take subjects or study things that they enjoy, that they like, that are attractive and pleasing to them. That's childish. We say that's childish. One of the things that we have observed recently is an increasing immaturity, to put that rather awkwardly.
Work backwards.
Of people who are less and less mature. That is, the 19-year-old of today is less mature than the 19-year-old 5 years ago, and he is less mature than the 19-year-old of 5 years before that. Why is that? Well, it's because maturity has to do with this business of duty, of doing what you don't like to do, and childhood does have to do with doing what you like to do. Children want to do what they want to do. They want their way, and very often they are allowed to do what they want to do. That's what we do with children. We say, well, the best thing with children is to let them do what they want. Leave them alone. Let them have their childhood, because that's what childhood is just doing what you feel like doing. And it's one of the great charms of childhood, and that's to that extent, the Greek authors are a kind of childhood of our civilization. This has been said by other people I wouldn't necessarily agree with about anything else. I think nearly everyone says that
people on both sides of the great warfare of civilization, I think, would agree to that, just as a fact.
Yeah. Whereas there is a maturing in the Romans, and the maturing comes because they've lost. That's what this poem is all about. It's about someone, Aeneas, namely, and all of those people who are traveling along with Aeneas, who have lost.
They lost the war.
They lost the war.
They lost the Trojan War, which is the most decisive war in the whole history of the world.
See, that's one of the reasons that Americans are often regarded by Europeans as immature. That's the constant criticism of Americans, is that they're unnaturally young. No matter what age they are, they seem young to Europeans, and they are. And the reason, it isn't because their civilization because American civilization hasn't lasted very long. That's not the point. It's that we have never lost. America has never lost a war. The Vietnam War wasn't quite the same thing.
It was a skirmish.
It was a skirmish.
Although it's had effects.
It's had its effects. But it isn't like being occupied by a foreign power of having your homeland destroyed.
Or being in exile.
Or being in exile. It's none of those things. We've never suffered that at all. The only place that you can find that is in the South.
Well, the South is Virgilian.
The South is more Virgilian.
Very much so, and romantic.
Yes, yes.
You know, if you want to write $1 billion romance, it has to be a Southern one. I read in the paper the other day that they're going to try to remake a movie of Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
And they say the reason is, by golly, there's no other way to make zillions, because that retired the genre. And that's true. That's a romance. That is, Gone with the Wind is an American romance. And who was it? Hawthorne wrote a book called The Blithedale Romance. So it's not a romance. No, that's New England. In fact, that's kind of a novel of ideas, kind of a thesis of a book.
Yeah.
But you can't imagine a book called A New England Romance. Somebody wrote a book called A New England Primer, but I never heard of anybody writing a New England romance. The North is not romantic. Why? Well, partly because the North won. I think that's true. It didn't suffer that devastation, that the burning of Atlanta reenacted the burning of Troy. And the cowboy is a romantic figure, and he's usually a Southern. The drawing, well, the Virginian, I guess, is the most famous paradigm.
And they're exiles.
They're exiles.
Really, they go out west because the South doesn't exist.
It's been destroyed, so they go out to seek their fortune in a new world. And they have that romantic sadness about them. They're wanderers, and they go through, as I say, they come into the saloon and someone picks a fight with them and they say, why don't you go away? And they try to postpone it as long as possible. And that's certainly true of Aeneas. If you wanted to go through a novel like The Virginian, which is the paradigm of all the great westerns, what are the Virgilian elements? I think you could find a million of them. I'm sure it's been done. As a matter of fact, you certainly call it a romance, and you'd find common incidents immediately. As I say, that can become just a kind of silly, arid study, but it need not be. That is, there is a significance in these similarities. Well, Western civilization is not Greek. The Greek experience, somebody wrote a book called The Greek Experience. That's a good title. It's a pretty good book, I think, as I remember. But you really couldn't write a book called The Roman Experience, because the Romans, the word experience isn't the right word. It's the Roman reflection, or the Roman re-experience. The Roman response, I think, would be a good word. The word response means spontaneity reconsidered. That response means spontaneity, like a fountain, like something springing up, like a jet of water. But a response is what you do in reaction to that, as you were saying a moment ago, not action, but reaction. The Romans are a passive people. They took the Greek experience and they gave it a permanent form. I think one of the things we can say about the Greeks is that they burn out.
The Greeks, someone, I don't know where I got this. Maybe I just heard it on the radio idly. Somebody said that imitation is not Greek. The Greeks didn't imitate anybody. Whereas it is very Roman. The Romans do.
All Greek art is imitated. This poem is an imitation of Homer.
Yes,
sometimes
almost line for line. Someone has said that there isn't a single thing in the Aeneid that cannot be found in either the Odyssey or the Iliad. I think that's probably literally true, and probably Virgil would consider that one of the highest compliments you could pay his book.
And we mean right down to the words.
Yes.
The images.
Yes.
When he says the sea turbulent something, it'll be quoted right directly.
I'm always surprised when I do reread Virgil. Especially coming right from reading Homer, I'm always surprised to see again new things that I hadn't noticed before that are right out of Homer.
Speeches, episodes, things like the funeral games for Patroclus are reenacted in funeral games, and well, all the way up and down the line.
Oh, it's very conscious. That is, this isn't just influence. This is conscious, deliberate imitation. That is the first half of this book up to the underworld, the voyage into the underworld, which of course is a direct imitation. Up to that point is an imitation of the Odyssey, and the second part has to do with the war in Italy, and that imitates the Iliad. So he combines both of the great poems in this.
And the descent itself is imitated from the descent into hell.
Yes,
is imitated from the Odyssey.
Exactly, from the Odyssey. Everything is there, and we say, well, that is the Romans, and therefore you see, in an age where novelty and originality and freedom. We were talking last time about freedom, where those things have a great priority and a great value. People say, well, why should you read Virgil? After all, it's just an imitation, and the Romans never did anything original. The Romans, for example, you can say, well, we owe the whole code of law to the Romans. They are the ones who made the laws. And if you say, well, where did they get it from? You say, well, they got it from the Greeks.
So the key word there is code. That is, they codified.
They codified. The Greeks, of course, the Greeks were the ones who thought of the very idea of law. That is, the principles.
But they couldn't hold on to
the Greeks, but they never codified it.
They lost them.
And they lost them, and nothing ever came of it. It was all, as we say, it was all theory for the Greeks. Now, theory is really very exciting. Theory is more exciting than practice on the whole. That is, it's at a higher intellectual level to conceive of ideas, to see things. That's what the word, as we pointed out, the word theory means, is to see something with your mind. The Greeks have a great gift, had a great gift for that. But as for putting those things into practice, well, they didn't. They didn't do that at all, and the Romans did. And this is a great oversimplification, but it's still true.
But that's another way of talking about the same thing, isn't it? Yeah. That is, the Romans are a practical people.
Yes.
So
yes.
We say right away, they invented the way to run a government. They didn't invent the theory, but actually how to do it. Julius Caesar, who is the greatest Roman real person, that is, he's not in a book, he was a real man, we would say of Caesar that he invented empire. By doing it, he said, this is how you govern, this is how you rule. And the Romans went ahead and they did it. And we got the famous Pax Romana, which lasted for 500 years, the longest period in the whole history of the world, when there has been no war. Imagine that, 500 years of peace. Nobody ever achieved it, even got near to it before or since. We talk about the Pax Britannica. It lasted from 100 years. It lasted from pretty much Napoleon, I would say 1815, the Congress of Vienna, wasn't it? 1815 to 1914, when World War I broke out. So what? You got 99 years of British imperial rule, and the British were consciously imitating the Romans. But they only managed to do it for 100 years. The Romans kept the peace for 500 years, and that's what Virgil celebrates in this book. And he really does look forward to that. I guess the most famous passage in the whole book is a prophetic vision, which comes in the underworld, when Aeneas descends and meets his father down there, and his father says, stick to your duty, my son, because great things are to come. And then he gives him this vision of what is to come, and it's a vision, and it is a real vision, as Virgil lived before this happened, but he predicts it. It's a prophetic poem. He predicts this great world peace when there'll be one government which will run the world. This imperial idea of the Roman Empire. And by golly, it really happened. But it happened through government. It happened through law, through codification, through doing things the way they've always been done, rather than being original. This stamps, and that's a Roman word too. The Roman world is a stamped world. It's like a seal. This is the way you do it. This is the Roman way. There isn't any Greek stamp. Every Greek is different. Every little city-state, Athens is nothing like Sparta, and neither of them is like Corinth. But with the Roman Empire, you get a world from one end to the other. The sun rises and the sun sets on the Roman Empire. What's the most famous thing the Romans ever did? You say it right away. They built roads. The Roman roads. As I understand it, the Roman roads, just in sheer miles, have just been passed in the United States. So someone did a measurement. It was a silly little article appeared in a popular magazine, and they said that something like in the year 1975 or something like that, the United States finally has as many miles of paved road as the Romans had. I mean, imagine that, with all of our technology and everything, that we finally just caught up to these Romans. But they built roads. No, there's nothing very exciting about about building a road.
No, and they were permanent roads. They were made to last, and they did last. They lasted forever.
They still use it.
You can still find those Roman roads, even when they've fallen into a kind of disuse. You can still find them. It doesn't take very long for a modern road to disappear. If you abandon a concrete highway for a year or two, go back to look at it, and it'll be practically non-existent. You'll be able to find some of the results, the fragments of it, but it will disappear very, very rapidly. Not the Roman road. They built for permanence. That was one of the things that they wanted, and you can't have originality if you're going to have permanence. We're still very, very much under the influence of the Renaissance. That's we still live. That's when the modern world really begins, and the modern world put this premium on originality, on change.
Make it new. Make it new. The new Atlantis. The new Organon. Let's redo Aristotle and all that.
The plus ultra. It used to be the motto, which is very Roman, is the ne plus ultra. Nothing more. There's nothing more to be done. That used to be the motto of the Pillars of Hercules. Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and nobody went beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That was considered the end of the world, and that was the ne plus ultra, and it was Bacon. In the 17th century, Francis Bacon, that is, who his novum organum, new organon, there's the word new, had on its cover, as its frontispiece, it had a picture of a ship sailing beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That's a kind of genius.
He wrote the New Atlantis.
He wrote the New Atlantis, which is the new. The Atlantis, of course, was a city which Plato describes in the Timaeus, which was lost. That is, it was a great city which had achieved a kind of perfection, but then it was lost in the past, you see, and but Now Francis Bacon comes along, and in his fiction, they discover a new Atlantis, full of new inventions, which are going to expand the mind of man and change his way of life, as indeed they did. And we're still living in that age.
But the Romanist traditional ne plus ultra, and also really nothing new. That is nothing beyond the pillars, as it were.
Right.
And also, let's do it the way it has been done. Because, well, for example, take Aristotle. Aristotle made certain discoveries. Are you going to do them again? Sometimes, to make it funny, we say, "What do you want to do? Reinvent the wheel? The wheel has already been invented. If you want to have a wheel, this is the way it has to be." But Francis Bacon thought you could reinvent everything, and we still think so. We're still
his word. You see, it was the new organon. Now the organon was logic. That was logic. That was Aristotle's logic. He was going to create a completely new.
Imagine that, a new logic, a new philosophy.
And he did, in a way. He did create a new philosophy. And it has created a new and experimental world.
It's experimental philosophy.
Where everything is subject to constant change, and where there is no stability at all.
Sometimes we say of the Romans that they were engineers. They were not philosophers. They were not poets. They were engineers. And even Virgil is sometimes called an engineer rather than a poet. And that is, an engineer is a practical man who takes principles that have been given to him, and then he constructs something on the basis of them. And Virgil did. It was one of the most astonishing things to learn, just as a matter of fact, about Virgil, is how he actually composed this poem. We know this as a fact. He says so himself in a fragment which survives from the ancient world. He wrote the entire poem out in prose, and then he versified it. Now, and it took him, was it 10 years to write this poem? That is, he just took the prose and then he put it into poetic form, and he tried this word and then tried that word and hammered it into shape and engineered the whole thing. The modern poet just says, why, where's the inspiration? Where's the originality?
Where's the spontaneity?
Spontaneity.
And you're quite right. That is, this poem has the look and the sound and the feeling of something highly wrought, perfectly wrought. Whereas the Greek poem has that freshness, that spontaneity that we talked about before, that is enormously appealing, and that you like right away. This poem was never really completed. Virgil worked on it for 10 years, and it was a commissioned piece of poetry. That's another thing.
Of course, it was a duty.
It's different. It was a duty. He had to do it. Caesar Augustus commissioned him to write this poem. He was the emperor, and he wanted a poem which would celebrate the empire. And Virgil was the greatest, the leading poet of the day, and he commissioned him to write the poem. So Virgil wrote it over a very long period of time, and he would read it. He'd bring it to the emperor and read it to the court, and then he'd take it home and he'd work on it. And he'd correct it and improve it and tear it up and start over again. And when he died, the poem wasn't finished. Now, it was finished. We obviously have all of the books, but it wasn't completed. In the mind of Virgil, it wasn't finished. Finished in the word, in the sense of being polished. This poem has finish on it in a lot of places. But Virgil wasn't satisfied with it. He said, well, no, in fact, he ordered that it be destroyed after his death. In his will, he ordered that it be destroyed because it wasn't really ready yet. It wasn't finished. And it was only by the direct action of Caesar Augustus that the poem survives at all. The Romans took wills very seriously, and they were prepared to destroy this poem because that's what Virgil wanted. And it was only because the emperor himself personally intervened.
He, in a way, was the Supreme Court. He was able to reverse the lower court.
You see, that's, again, the strength of tradition.
Mm-hmm.
A man's will, a man's will is his will. I mean, his last will and testament, that is what he wants. And by gosh, in Rome, that's what he got. And it took something very extraordinary to overturn that kind of custom and tradition. And that's why we have the poem. But that, you can't imagine that being true of Homer. We don't know anything about the composition of Homer. I mean,
no, but it certainly wasn't written out in prose.
It wasn't written out in prose.
No,
it wasn't
commissioned.
No, it wasn't commissioned. It wasn't written. It may have been written over. I mean, it was composed.
Oh, but it was
you might say.
It was sung. In fact, when Virgil says, "Arms I sing," and the man, actually, this poem is not a song. In a way, it's prose. That is to say, it's verse, but it doesn't have that lyric quality that Homer has.
No, you can well imagine. It is not difficult at all to imagine Homer himself, the bard, with the blind bard with the lyre, singing or chanting the verses. Even though we don't know the Greek, we know even in the English translation, prose translation, we can imagine someone chanting it. I had a teacher in college who had Greek. She was an English teacher, but she had studied Greek as a child. She started reading Greek, and she could still recite some Greek poetry by heart. And she used to do it every once in a while. To illustrate a point. And it was absolutely astonishing. It just wowed everybody to hear her suddenly break out into this kind of lilting chant of this Greek. I'll never forget it. I can't do it myself at all. I don't know Greek. But you can't do that with Roman. You can't do that with
in fact,
Latin.
Again, in another one of those
Virgil.
fragments, there we have a few biographical fragments of Virgil. And one of them is that he wrote the poem in prose first, and then he says, it's kind of an ugly image, he says, I licked it into shape. The way a she-bear is said to lick her cubs when they're born, to lick them into shape. But another fragment speaks of this. Virgil was asked about people who performed poetry. And he makes a very nasty comment. He says there's one thing he can't stand, and that's people who sing rather than read when they read publicly. That is, and Lord, we know, Robert Frost made the same comment about Carl Sandburg, wasn't it? How did that go? He said, it's sort of the Bible. Frost made some, I can't remember it, but he made some disparaging comment about people who chant. And Frost himself never did that. That is, when he read his poems, the words themselves, the meaning of the word carries the melody. Whereas there's a certain kind of poet who goes, the Walt Whitman impulse, I hear America singing, and Frost just couldn't stand that, and neither could Virgil.
In our time, the greatest person, the most famous person for that was Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas.
That's right.
Who sang his poems.
The Welsh bard.
The Welsh bard.
The poems don't bear up. That is, there is something false about that. I don't say it's false in Homer, because Homer was a bard. Yeah. But there is something false about taking a poem which is not written in that tradition, and then deliberately trying to read it in that way.
Yeah, well, the Welsh have a great singing tradition, and a great musical tradition, but they don't have a great tradition of poetry, a great poetic tradition that will sustain. They write beautiful music. But a poem is that may be sung is quite a different thing, and the Greeks pretty much did it once and for all, and it's never really been done again. Whereas the Romans, see, once again, Greece disappeared.
This is a written poetry.
This is written. This is written. Although it can be read aloud.
Oh well, Virgil read it aloud.
He did read it aloud.
But the point I was making is that he read it aloud. He didn't sing it.
Yes.
And there's all the difference in the world in that way. The Romans are a more prosaic. They're not a lyrical people. That's even true, I think, of their lyric poets. That is, they're meant to be read. There are plays on words. There are things that you can only see on the printed page. Whereas with Homer, there was an oral tradition there. This is a totally different world.
Well, this was a point that we were making. Is that when you get into the age of literacy, everything changes. Everything changes, and poetry changes.
Now, this, as you can tell, I think from what we're saying, we're making a defense of Virgil here, but a defense has to be made. The initial response is likely to be, well, gee, I really don't like this as well.
It's disappointment, I think, and what we're saying is that is a perfectly natural response. In fact,
I hope you have it.
I hope you have it. I feel very distrustful of students who come to me after a lecture of this kind and say, well, I really like Virgil. I like him a lot better than I do Homer.
Go back and read it again.
Yeah, I have one of two responses to that. One is that I just don't believe them. I just think they're trying to, they're lying, that they think they can please the teacher by saying that. And the other, which is much worse even, is that it may really be true that they have the idea that they like Virgil. And then you say, well, you haven't got it at all, and there must be something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you if
you're not young.
Right.
You're middle-aged, and you have no right to be middle-aged. You have no right.
No, and that's a serious. In fact, that's a serious matter. Sometimes students who are inclined to be more serious are often rather too serious. That is, they're old before their time, which is certainly not desirable.
No, it's not. It's not a virtue.
No.
And you remember that story that someone told of attending a series of lectures, a course from the late great philosopher, Thomist philosopher Charles de Koninck, who was lecturing, I think, on the Organon, as a matter of fact. It was on Aristotle's, it was on some of St. Thomas's commentaries on Aristotle's logic. And at the end of one of the lectures, the student just raised his hand and said, I'm not getting this. I don't know what, can't you give us more examples? Can't you? And de Koninck just raised his hands. He extended his palms to the class and raised his arms as if to say, you have to come up. There's no way that I can bring this down. This is hard. And you have to come up. And I would say that of Virgil. I would say, if you don't like this, that's wonderful. But you're going to have to work on this. And we're not going to make it likable. We're not going to be able to. That's not the point. The point is that this is great. But you're going to have to work on it. It's not immediately, obviously, likable.
See, that's the remarkable thing about Homer, is that it is great, but it's immediately great, and you're just swept up in it. It lifts you up. You don't have to do anything.
And Plato is like that.
It carries you along. Plato
as opposed to Aristotle.
Yes.
I mean, Aristotle is not likable. Didn't someone once say he didn't like Aristotle, and someone replied, that's because you don't like the truth. The truth isn't likable. Well, some truth is likable, that's the point. But some isn't. And this, we've been talking a great deal about this to students in relation to their lives. Being, say, 35 years old isn't very likable. We have a lot of older students who are coming back. They visit us from time to time, and they complain. And they often say, in a way, you lied to us when we were in college. You made the world seem fair, beautiful, like a world of dreams. Gee, we read Homer and we read Plato and life was just beautiful, and now we're out here in the world and it's not that way. Why didn't you warn us? And I think one of our answers is, well, we read Virgil. And then they'll say, oh,
say, well,
I didn't really read that.
I didn't read that.
I never really liked Virgil.
Yeah, I didn't like it. And we, of course, we gave exactly the same lecture at that time, saying, well, you're not going to like Virgil now, but you have to read him anyway.
And you're not going to like being 35 either. And when you find these 35-year-olds who like being 35, you say, oh, why don't they grow up? You see them running around in violent sports and pretending to be 18. And you say, no. There's a time to grow up and to face the way the world is. And this is what we say, isn't it? What does it mean to be 35? It means to have failed. It means to have lost the war. It doesn't have to do with a mere chronology. It doesn't have to do with mere adding up of years. There comes a time in your life, and the reason we say 35 is that it pretty well usually happens by that time. But there comes a time in life when you wake up to this reality that you've lost.
Or that you are lost. The phrase when you say "wake up," the phrase the beginning of the Divine Comedy comes to mind. When the poet, when Dante himself says that I in the middle of the journey of life, I woke up in a dark wood, and I realized that I had lost the straight path. He suddenly discovers in the middle of his life that he's lost. That is, it's the same idea that you have lost, that you are lost, and
spiritual battle.
Yeah, and that if that doesn't happen, then you are lost. Then if you never realize you're lost, then you are lost. That is, you
can never find your way, because you are lost whether you know it or not.
Yes, you're still lost. Yes, you see people like that all the time. You go up and you meet them, and they're
I'm not lost.
They're perhaps 30, and they say, you say, well, how are you doing? And they say, oh, just great. Everything is going perfectly. I'm going to be promoted next year, and my marriage is perfect, and my children are turning out very well, and everything is just going as well as it possibly could. And you just say, oh dear. They haven't. They don't. And you look at them and you say, "My gosh, he's completely lost. But he doesn't know it at all. And probably he will. Probably he will realize that he is. But if he doesn't, then you really that's cause for great.
And for Aeneas, this happened
when he was
25. That's right, 25. Yeah. It happened early. And for little Julius, it happened when he was 6.
Youth in this poem, youth. There's a great sadness about youth, even.
It's been denied them in a way, taken away. How can you be a child when you're in exile? You have to grow up fast. You don't have those harmless pleasures of youth. Again, isn't that one of the themes in Hamlet that? How that bitterness. Laertes wants to go off to college, and you can't. Something's happened to the world, and in our time, we just are not going to be able. We don't have the luxury of childhood. We're just not going to be able to be young.
That's why people argue about what the age of of Hamlet is.
Yeah.
Some people think he's 35, and some people think he's 19. Everybody in the play speaks of him as being young. I mean, really young.
Yeah.
But
he does seem.
But he seems
like a man in his 30s.
Like an older man. You also remember the scene at the very beginning of Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, when he wakes up and realizes, he says that he's living in the city of destruction. It's very much like the city of Troy. The whole city, he looks to me as a vision of the place where he lives, and it's on fire. The whole city is on fire, and he says, I'm going to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. That's his response. Well, it's the same thing. Some people say, "Oh, Bunyan, he's so serious." You say, and yes, well, he is. He is. There's no fun. There's no fun in Bunyan. There's no fun in the Aeneid at all. No fun.
There are people. You meet them today. You meet them on the street. As you say hello. And they don't seem to think anything's wrong.
Yeah.
And I always think, boy, they're just fools. They're just fools. You have to see it. There's a great line at the end of King Lear about this, when one of the greatest things ever written, I think. We who are young will never see so much or live so long.
Yeah.
Wow, that could have been said by Hamlet. That is, it's the same idea, and it could have been said by Aeneas. We said this before, that Shakespeare writes neither tragedy nor comedy, but in some ways romance, a kind of dramatic romance. That is, he deals in his plays with these themes that we're talking about, and in that sense, he's rather anti-Renaissance. He's against the spirit of his own time in many ways. There's a great sadness, again, a great weight in him.
If anyone who thinks that Francis Bacon wrote the plays of Shakespeare only needs to read Bacon, and you will see the difference, because Bacon is one of those guys who really thinks that everything is going to be all right. Everything is all right, and it's going to get better and better. The New Atlantis.
He's like Norman Vincent Peale.
Yeah.
I just saw in the newspaper just this week, one of these popular magazines. Whatever became, it said, of Norman Vincent Peale? He's 89 years old, and he's still saying...
Still thinking positively.
Still thinking positively. There he was, with his wife with no teeth, and there they were saying everything every day is getting better and better, It's grotesque. It's positive.
Shakespeare, at the end of 7 Ages of Man, sans teeth, sans hair, sans everything.
When you think of Francis Bacon, I always think of Ben Franklin and Norman Vincent Peale. They seem to be the figure. It is a perpetual figure.
Yeah, whereas
of man.
The opposite of Aeneas. Shakespeare is not that way, and Virgil is certainly not that way.
That famous portrait of Shakespeare that you see, is that the only one there is? I don't know. It's one of the several.
The famous one.
But the famous one, boy, he looks like that. I think that must be true. Mm-hmm. That is the face that wrote those plays, and it is a sad face. Mm-hmm. Not gloomy. No. Again, but it has about it that sense of the essential, profound loss of things. It's just everywhere in his plays. Over and over again, even in The Tempest, or maybe especially in The Tempest.
Oh, yes.
When he talks about the new world, we're in exile.
This is weird. Just shadows. He says. Everything is just shadows, and how everything is fleeting away. Old age is coming upon us and upon the world. I think it's precisely because of the superficiality of people like Francis Bacon, who are running the world, and when those kinds of people are running the world, and you look out and look at reality,
it makes you worse.
It just makes you just say, "Oh dear," I can see how bad things really are.
Well, Western civilization is not Greek; it's Roman. We are Romans. We understand the Greeks, but we are not Greeks. That is, it's obvious that we are not Greeks.
In a way, we had to have the Greeks. You couldn't have had the Romans without the Greeks. It's a fact.
We feed on them as our food, but we're not ourselves Greeks. We do not look at the world immediately. In fact, I think it is the fact that the modern man likes the Greek more than the Roman is a sign that he's over the hill. He's decadent, and he wants to be a child again.
Yeah.
But civilization itself is a Roman thing.